Hi everybody, it's Scott again with the Sengoku series. It's been a long time since my last video, and there's a reason for that. My fiance was diagnosed with breast cancer earlier this year. Um, Thankfully, she seems to be, out of the woods. Knock on wood, they seem to have caught it early enough. She's still in the recovery process, but almost 100% again. Plus, a litany of other things going on. I'm working on my dissertation for a PhD. I have a young daughter to take care of. So, needless to say, making YouTube videos has been pretty low on my priority list. Although I've been meaning to pick this up again once things sort of settle down. And now that that's happened, I really want to keep this going and make sure it doesn't sort of die out and go inactive. So I'm pretty much going to pick up where I left off with the last video. We're still talking about Oda Nobunaga, probably the most famous Sengoku daimyo to come out of the medieval Japanese period. The first of the great unifiers who brought Japan from a really divided, fractured state into set it on course to becoming a unified state again. And where we had left it before, Oda Nobunaga had risen to the head of his relatively minor family, the Oda, who had been deputy governors of Owari province, a relatively obscure province in central Japan. Against all odds, he had defeated a rather major name in Imagawa Yoshimoto at the Battle of Okigazama. It's really it's hard to separate sort of the romance or the legend from actual history, but it's pretty obvious that with a much smaller force, he defeated a larger force, and on the back of that, rose to prominence, defeating over a rather long period of time his neighbor to the north, the Saito clan, who controlled Mino province. And after eventually defeating the Saito, was poised to march on the capital, which was Kyoto at the time, which was where the imperial palace was, and traditionally the headquarters of the shogun, who was the military dictator of Japan at this time. As I've talked about in other videos, at this point the emperor was really just a figurehead, a ceremonial figure, and actual power was in the hands of the position of shogun, who again was basically a military dictator who ran the country. It was a hereditary position, and at this time the shogunate belonged to the Ashikaga family. But they had been on the decline for quite a while. In fact, Ashikaga Yoshiteru had become basically a puppet, a prisoner of the Miyoshi clan, who controlled Kyoto in the early stages of the Sengoku period. He was not a very compliant puppet, so the Miyoshi clan conspired to have him killed and did assassinate him, and hoped to put a very young member of the Ashikaga clan in his place, who would basically be, they're a dummy shogun while they were the power behind the scenes. Unfortunately for them, Ashikaga Yoshiteru had a brother, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who was not supposed to be the shogun. He had taken religious vows and become a monk. However, when his brother was killed, he saw this as a chance to take the shogunate for himself, and because he had a claim, a legitimate claim, he could make that play. The problem was finding a warlord, a daimyo, who was both powerful enough and willing to march on Kyoto, defeat the Miyoshi clan, and install him as shogun. And he went to a number of warlords, several of whom were willing to help, who, for whatever reason, whether out of personal ambition or tradition, wanted to help sort of a rightful heir to the throne, or to the position of shogun, rather. But for various reasons, such as they had problems of their own at home to deal with. They weren't in a position to march on the capital, or because of geography, they were just too far away from the capital that it would be really impractical for them to march on Kyoto without running afoul of all these other different clans in the way. And that's really where Oda Nobunaga has the fortune of geography on his side. And in addition to being in a strong position, he's defeated his neighbors to the east in the Imagawa. He's made an alliance with the Matsudaira, who he has an alliance with the head of the Matsudaira, the future Tokugawa Ieyasu. He secured the north. He's conquered Nino. So he is in a position to move to the west, which is where Kyoto is. So long story short, Ashikaga Yoshiaki goes to Oda Nobunaga and says, please, help me become shogun, and Nobunaga agrees. So in 1568, Oda Nobunaga marches on Kyoto, defeats some clans along the way, the Rokaku being one, as well as the Miyoshi, who by this point have also descended into infighting and factionalism. So in both cases, the Oda win pretty handily. And it's important to really stress at this point that Oda Nobunaga really isn't all that feared. Yes, he's marched on Kyoto. Yeah, he's installed Ashikaga Yoshiaki as the new shogun. But you could make the argument at the time that it was through luck. That defeating Imagawa Yoshimoto and his much larger army could have been just the luck of ambush, a fluke, basically. That in the long time it took him to take Mino from the Saito clan, sort of showed his weakness as a military commander. And in his quick march to Kyoto and defeating the Rokaku and the disunified Miyoshi, he was basically knocking out very small opposition on the way to a destination that just happened to be very close to where he already was. So rather contrary to what you might believe from video games and whatnot, taking the capital and having the shogun on your side was not enough to unify Japan and make you sort of the undisputed leader of all the warlords of Japan. It was still very, very, very uncertain at this point that Oda Nobunaga was anything more than an opportunist who had benefited from, again, geography and just having weak or unfortunate neighbors. So once Oda Nobunaga is established in Kyoto, there's an interesting situation that emerges where it's basically a situation of dual authority, in the fact that Oda Nobunaga is the military leader. He has the manpower, he has the soldiers, he's the de facto head of the government surrounding the court. But Ashikaga Yoshiaki is the de jure leader. He's the one that actually has a legitimate claim to be shogun. On paper, he's supposed to be the person calling the shots, and so you have this really, paradoxical situation where it's really unclear who's in charge, because both Oda Nobunaga and Ashikaga Yoshiaki want to make it clear that they are, the senior partner, and in the end, Oda Nobunaga has to really remonstrate and issues literally remonstrances to the shogun, saying, um, you're behaving in a way that is unbecoming of a shogun, um, and really, the sort of the subtext is, I'm the real power here. You're the junior partner. You are shogun in title only. In actual power, I am the hegemon here. But it is interesting to note that Oda Nobunaga does not take any positions that would actually confer on him sort of a formal authority. He's offered the position of Kanrei, which is the deputy shogun, and he refuses it. He distances himself from anything that would sort of bring him into the established order in Kyoto. He does eventually accept a court rank, which is sort of brings him a little bit closer into the nobility, but he does this more for practical reasons, because he wants to ingratiate himself with the nobility and get them on his side as political allies, not because, again, he wants to join the established order. And this is really interesting because it indicates something that people talk about a lot, which is, what was Oda Nobunaga's grand ambition? Spoiler alert, he ends up getting assassinated in 1582 by one of his generals, so we don't really know what he would have done had he kept the reins of power and unified Japan, assuming he lived that long and was able to do that. His unwillingness to sort of embrace the established order, at least in the short term, suggests that he did not want to put himself in a position where he would be subordinate to either the shogun or the imperial court. He wanted to sort of keep his power he didn't want himself to be a lightning rod. A good sort of allegory or metaphor or comparison, I guess, is The Sopranos, where Tony Soprano is the street boss. On the street, he's the one calling shots. There's Junior Soprano, his uncle, is the actual boss, the boss in name only, but he's under house arrest. He can't do anything. He's under investigation. But Junior basically gets all the heat, but Tony Soprano is able to run things from the street, from out of everyone's view, and that's sort of how Oda Nobunaga wants to keep it. Now, in the long term, did he want to abolish the imperial court? Did he want to establish his own system with him basically as a dictator? Some people have suggested that he wanted to make himself essentially the king of Japan, in a way, in his own sort of dynasty. We'll never know that because it's all conjecture. There's no way of knowing what his plans were or ambitions were, because he didn't, write anything down, or people just don't do that. I'm gonna leave a record of how I'm gonna just tear down the old order. Although it is pretty clear that he had no reverence or love for tradition. He wasn't blinded like a lot of people of his time period were by custom and tradition and things being done in a certain way. And we'll see a bit of that later on. But I want to first talk about Matsunaga Hisahide briefly, and I'll probably end up doing a video just dedicated to him separately, because he is a really interesting character. He serves the Miyoshi clan as an advisor, as one of their vassals, but he's sort of the quintessential schemer in sort of Japanese legend. He's disloyal to the Miyoshi. He schemes against the shogun. When Oda Nobunaga defeats the Miyoshi, he pledges his allegiance to Oda Nobunaga, who accepts him, but never stops scheming against Oda Nobunaga. Later, he raises up in rebellion against Oda Nobunaga. Oda Nobunaga besieges him, and rather than surrender and lose some of his precious tea items, the tea ceremony being something very popular at this time. Matsunaga Hiei famously blows himself up with his tea items. But he's just worth mentioning sort of as an aside because in many ways, he's the exact opposite of the honorable, loyal, direct samurai of legend. He's the exact opposite. He's a schemer. He has no loyalty to anyone. He changes loyalties as long as it serves him. And, rather than surrender and, die with honor, he goes out in a very sort of petty and literally explosive way. So he's an interesting character, but I'm just going to mention him as an aside here. So in 1570, Oda Nobunaga starts running into major resistance, and the first clans to really turn against him are the Asakura and the Azai to the north. And the Asakura were a very prestigious old clan, so it wasn't all that surprising that they would oppose Oda Nobunaga. The Asakura had actually been one of the clans that Ashikaga Yoshiaki had gone to asking for help to restore, put him in, to make him shogun. But the Asakura had been willing, but just didn't do it, and they wanted to hold on to their own lands. They were very practical in that sense. So the Asakura oppose Oda Nobunaga, so he finds himself going to war against them. But much to his surprise, he goes to war against the Azai. The Azai were a clan that had deep connections to the Asakura going back generations. However, Nobunaga had expected them to remain loyal to him because he had married his sister Oichi to the head of the Azai, Azai Nagamasa. Now, for whatever reasons, again, it's unclear, probably out of tradition and honor, Azai Nagamasa decided to go with the long-standing alliance with the Asakura and sided against Oda Nobunaga, rather than honoring his marriage alliance with the Oda. So the Asakura and the Azai sort of become the focus of the resistance against Oda Nobunaga, and they're joined by a number of other groups. Again, there's no real formal alliance. They don't meet and swear a vow to defeat Oda Nobunaga, but through letters and correspondence, agree to work together that we're going to stop this this no-name newcomer on the scene who's probably who's probably just a blip on our radar, who's probably just going to be a footnote in history. This nobody from Hawaii province. But again, so in addition to Asakura and the Azai, there's the Iko-Iki, who are spread out across Japan. They are a league of samurai, mostly lower class samurai who worked the land, sort of the landed gentry of medieval Japan. As well as poor peasants who banded together more out of self-preservation than anything. They just self-defense leagues is basically what Iki means in Japanese. But they had a religious element. They were unified by belief in the Hongonji temple, which espoused a certain particular school of Buddhism, the Pure School Land, which I've talked about in another video, which you can watch if you like, if you want me to explain more about them. But they had a series of temple complexes, temples that were basically fortresses, and they also opposed Oda Nobunaga. And then there was also, most notably, the Takeda clan in far to the east of Kyoto, based in the province of Kai. In Shinano, they had sort of risen to prominence in this period. But again, because of geography, they were far off from the capital, but they were building momentum and in a position under their most famous leader, Takeda Shingen, in a position to march on the capital. So in 1571 is really when this large anti-Nobunaga alliance or league develops. And Oda Nobunaga sets about destroying his enemies. Although, again, the odds seem stacked against him, and this is one of those occasions where it seems like he is just going to be a footnote in history. But he manages to survive. And it's worth noting that Ashikaga Yoshiaki is actually directing a lot of this resistance to Nobunaga from behind the scenes. Oda Nobunaga actually wants to compromise with Ashikaga Yoshiaki and seeks, when he's sort of wagging his finger and saying, you're acting in a way, that's not in your interest, and you're the junior partner here, I'm the senior partner. He doesn't exile or kill Ashikaga Yoshiaki from the off. He actually just tries to work with him and tries to get him to sort of sit down and shut up. But Ashikaga Yoshiaki is nothing if not persistent, and writes a lot of letters to the Takeda and to these other groups, asking them to basically help him to come to Kyoto, defeat Oda Nobunaga, and again restore shogunal authority. And so really, Oda Nobunaga again manages to overcome the odds. And one of the first things he does is he destroys a very close enemy of his, which is one I haven't mentioned yet. It's the temple complex at Mount Hiei. It's a huge monastery. It's been there for generations, and as I've explained in other videos, Buddhist temples, the really large ones, are not just religious institutions. They're also political institutions. They have a lot of political influence because of their religious position. They're a lot like the Catholic Church in medieval period and into the early modern period, in that they, because of their religious authority, they have a lot of political authority, and the monks at Mount Hiei are no different. And they actually are positioned on a mountain looking over Kyoto. Oda Nobunaga challenges their authority, takes some of their land, so the monks of Mount Hiei are his enemies, and he basically decimates Mount Hiei. And this is scandalous at the time. Now, in popular culture, this is often made out to show how unreligious or even demonic or evil that Oda Nobunaga was, that he would destroy, slaughter all these monks and destroy this sacred place. But in actuality, it was no secret to anyone that these monks were not innocents. They were not just innocent people praying and all that. They were politically involved. They had women on the mountain. They had maybe not wives, but they definitely had girlfriends is not the correct term, but what I mean. And families and everything like that, and wealth, material comforts, all these things that Buddhists are not supposed to have. And Oda Nobunaga, being this reverent guy, these monks are sort of cloaked in tradition. They're cloaked in the ideology of the period that they are these sacred, untouchable, religious, holy people. And Oda Nobunaga doesn't pay any lip service to that idea. He's the reality is that they are a political institution. They are a threat to his political power, and so he wipes them out. He massacres them. And this is something that he'll repeat again and again and again when he defeats his enemies, is that he doesn't seek compromise or doesn't want to make a deal, which is something that his successor Toyotomi Hideyoshi does a lot. When Hideyoshi wants to defeat someone, he says, let's sit and talk about this. I'll let you keep a couple of provinces, but I'm going to take this one and that one. But you're basically going to be under me as my vassal. You just have to recognize me as being supreme over you. Oda Nobunaga, if you dared to defy and resist him, he would utterly destroy you, and really, does not leave anything left if you dared to go against him. And even if you did, manage to become, one of his retainers, one of his vassals, he would still treat you pretty badly, which is something we'll talk about more in the next video when we talk about his assassination. So Oda Nobunaga, gets lucky in 1573. Takeda Shingen dies. And I don't mean lucky in the sense that Takeda Shingen was this great strategist or brilliant warrior, as he sometimes is made out to be in popular culture. A lot of that is a myth, and propaganda that was circulated about the Takeda after the fact. In reality, Takeda Shingen was, again, he was lucky. He murdered his way to the top of his clan. Defeated a bunch of weaker clans around him and built up a power base, and had a large army that was, prepared to march on Kyoto. So Oda Nobunaga is lucky in the sense that, for the time being, because their leader dies, the Takeda clan isn't an imminent threat. They have to sort of pause and, observe ceremony, bury Shingen, and then rally around Shingen's heir, Takeda Katsuyori. In the meantime, Ashikaga Yoshiaki rebels. He basically declares war on Oda Nobunaga, thinking that the Takeda invasion is imminent and Oda Nobunaga's days are numbered. He's wrong. Oda Nobunaga defeats him, and Yoshiaki is sent into exile. And really, up until the end, Oda Nobunaga tries to seek compromise, and it's really Ashikaga Yoshiaki who forces the issue. Instead of Oda Nobunaga getting rid of Ashikaga Yoshiaki ruthlessly, as you might assume, based on Oda Nobunaga's ruthless reputation, from popular culture. It's actually the opposite. Ashikaga Yoshiaki just cannot tolerate being the junior partner in his relationship with Oda Nobunaga, and rebels and loses his position as shogun as a result. And I should also mention that the Asakura and the SI are also defeated at Odani Castle, which is the headquarters of the SI. Oda Nobunaga actually is fairly lenient as Oda Nobunaga goes with the Asakura, but he is very brutal with the SI, killing, having Nagamasa killed, but also the children of the SI clan. And again, there's a lot made about this in popular culture. It's the romance between Asai Nagamasa and Oichi, and sort of the conflicted nature of Asai Nagamasa as he goes off to war against his brother-in-law because he's honoring, this traditional alliance with the Asakura and blah 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 blah. Again, it was a political marriage and therefore had probably as much romance as most political marriages at the time. Oichi was basically being treated as property of the Oda clan in a way to sort of cement a union, a way to secure, a border, basically. So you shouldn't really read that much into that. And so that leaves the Ikoiki as an imminent threat, and they have one of their fortresses at Nagashima. And again, like at Mount Hiei, Oda Nobunaga, besieges Nagashima, defeats the Ikoiki army, and just massacres. I believe it's like 40,000 people, and that's not just soldiers. That's men, women, and children as well. And it's pretty well documented that Oda Nobunaga had not a lot of love for the Ikoiki, who were mostly, again, from sort of the commoner class of the feudal system. You know, a lot of people talk about how forward-thinking Oda Nobunaga was, in that, you know, he defied convention. One of his main generals and his eventual successor was Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who came from peasant stock, you know, and rose to become, you know, one of the top generals of Oda Nobunaga. And that Oda Nobunaga, you know, rubbed elbows with, you know, his assistants and his, you know, underlings, and that, you know, he wasn't this huge snob, but in a lot of ways he was a snob. I mean, he writes and talks about the farmers and the commoners who make up the Iko-Iki as being, you know, less than nothing. They're you know, household dust. They're dead human skin to him. They mean nothing. And I think, I mean, that's basically was his attitude towards his enemies. You know, he had a certain amount of respect for people who he could bring into his retainer band, as long as they were useful. And even if they were useful, he didn't treat them particularly well. It was sort of, you know, what have you done for me lately? You know, if you were a competent, you know, general, he would reward you with titles and lands and whatnot. But he would move you around and not allow you to build up an independent power base that could potentially threaten him. And, you know, if it pleased him, he would mock and ridicule you in court and, you know, in front of other people. So I think when it came to the Iko-Iki, these were not only people who were annoying him because they were standing in his way, but there were people that, you know, there was no possible use for them in his life. You know, they were rabble, who, you know, dared to defy him, who, you know, by all intents and purposes was the supreme hegemon of Japan, and was quickly becoming so at this point. So that brings us to 1575, and probably one of the more famous battles of the Sengoku period, the Battle of Naga Shino. And, you know, again, in popular media, there's this whole depiction of Naga Shino as this, you know, the idea of the famous Takeda Calvary charging the barricades with the Oda soldiers who are firing with rifles, you know, the new weapons from the West, and, you know, they use alternating volleys that cut down the charging Takeda, you know, horsemen, and the Takeda are slaughtered, and so on. This is mostly a myth, and it's been pretty well documented by this someone from the Samurai Archives forums, who's also a graduate student who specializes in this topic. You know, that is, you know, military, sort of the military history of the Sengoku period, and he's written. I'm talking about Nate Ledbetter, and he's written a lot about Naga Shino. And in fact, if you listen to the podcast, the Samurai Archives podcast, and if you follow the blog and the Samurai Archives website, you may be a little sick of hearing about this battle. But in actuality, what happens is that, you know, the Oda and his allies among the Tokugawa, Matsudaira, whatever you want to call them, you know, they've been defeated by the Takeda a number of times, the Takeda Calvary. So what Oda Nobunaga learns to do is that he is going to take away the power of the cavalry and their speed and their maneuverability, and he purposely chooses a battlefield where the terrain favors him. He puts very little room between his camp and the Takeda camp, so there's not a lot of room for maneuvering. And I believe there's a mountain to his north and a river to his south, so he can't really be flanked. So the cavalry really has no choice but to do a direct charge against terrain that, again, favors the defender, in this case the Oda. So it's really not so much firearms that make the difference, although, you know, there are firearms that are used, but, you know, the idea of, you know, of alternating volleys, and that Oda Nobunaga had the time or the inclination or, you know, the capacity to train, you know, these peasants, you know, who had been conscripted to do alternating volleys is pretty ridiculous. You know, so really it's the terrain and the battlefield, and Oda Nobunaga as sort of a, good military commander that leads to Oda victory and really the decimation of the Takeda clan. Katsuyori, who again, was not really seen as being the equal of Shingen. Again, and most of what we think of, Shingen's elevated status was really more to do with circumstance than his actual skill or ability. So the Takeda are wiped out, and slowly the Oda, as they advance westward, with the Tokugawa, basically just destroy the Takeda totally. It's again total decimation, typical Oda tactics. Takeda Katsuyori is forced to commit suicide, and a lot of his generals, the ones who don't die in battle at Nagashino, end up killing themselves too, or betraying Katsuyori and switching sides to the Oda, as those honorable, loyal samurai love to do. And so that really sums it up in terms of Oda Nobunaga's rise from sort of a minor regional power to essentially becoming on course to unify Japan. And he defeats this anti-Nobunaga League, and again, a lot of it is up to luck. Shingen dying from illness, not a sniper's bullet, as is sometimes claimed, is really fortunate. Again, not because Shingen's a great commander, but because it buys Oda Nobunaga a lot of time. Yoshiaki's really stupidity, his political, thinking he was smarter than he was, really aggressively seeking independence from his partnership with Oda Nobunaga when it wasn't in his interest to do so, despite Oda Nobunaga's repeated attempts to compromise and sort of, accept an alliance with him as long as Yoshiaki would be the junior partner, which Yoshiaki would not accept. These are all things that really, defeat the anti-Nobunaga alliance from within, which again is not to diminish, the vision or the talents of Oda Nobunaga and his generals, but again, it does sort of smash this, great man of history myth that, Oda Nobunaga was just this unparalleled genius and defeated everything on his own. There were a lot of structural factors and people making really stupid decisions that helped him along the way. And really, I think it's Naga Shino that shows that Oda Nobunaga is not just a lucky commander. You could write off Okahazama as a fluke. You can write off his defeating Namino as, just a war of attrition. You can write off him defeating the Rokaku and the Miyoshi as, a larger force just wiping out a smaller force. But it's really Naga Shino where, Oda Nobunaga picks terrain that favors him, that really and leads to a decisive defeat. But again, even that, part of that you have to say is also Katsuyori being really stupid and not listening to a lot of his generals who, if legend is to believe, counseled him to not attack on terrain that did not favor him or his cavalry at all. So again, not everything can be put up to Oda Nobunaga being a genius. So in the next episode, the final episode, we're going to cover the rest of his life, Nobunaga's life from 1575 up to his assassination in 1582. And before I go, in addition to the Samurai Archives forum and their podcast, I want to really recommend this book if you can get it. It's not easy to find. It's Japonius Tyrannus, which is a really terrible name. I'm sorry. It's written by. I'm probably going to murder this, so if you're Dutch, please forgive me. Jeroen Lammers. I'm, like I said, a PhD student. I belong to a university that's also a member of a consortium. This book only exists, or only one library in the consortium has it, and the consortium is huge. It's like basically every, major university in Washington D.C., and only one of them has this book. So it can be kind of hard to find. I mean, you can order it, you can order it on Amazon, but I think it's like $200 or $100 or something I'm seeing. But it's not so much about military history. So if you're one of these Osprey publishing people who loves battles and commanders and generals and blah blah blah, it's not so much about that. It's more about Oda Nobunaga and his relationship with Ashikaga Yoshiaki, and again that sort of dual power relationship that they had for a long time, and more of Oda Nobunaga as a politician and an administrator than as a commander. And that's why it's really important, like what guys like Nate Ledbetter are doing, because in academia there's a really strong prejudice against military history. That's something that armchair historians, people who care more about who are interested in video games and whatnot are read into, whereas refined urbane academics only want to read about tea ceremonies or the bathing practices of common people in the Edo period and stuff like that, which is all fine and good. I mean, all history has value, but it's wrong to write off military history as just being not worthy of academic research, because it is. So I think that wraps it up for this episode. Again, I'm so sorry it's been so long, but obviously, real life has a way of happening. And if you have any questions or comments for me, you can leave them in the comments of this video, or you can post in the Sengoku series thread on the Samurai Archives website. And thank you again to all the people at Samurai Archives. A lot of them wished me well, and my loved ones well too. So, and they do awesome work. They really are the best community if you are interested in history, real history of medieval Japan, and especially the Sengoku period. So I will see you next time. Bye-bye.